Our next presentation is Power, Privacy, and Transparency, and it's going to be presented by Catherine Austin Fitz.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You know, I live in a wonderful little farming community in Tennessee, but there is nothing like the love in the Bay Area. So thank you. It's really a privilege to be back among you, and I've seen so many friends. I was just talking to Peter Phillips. Peter, where are you? Raise your hand. Peter Phillips, yeah. And when you realize he's been doing the censored stories for 40 years and you look at how much he's accomplished, you know, it's another story of a mustard seed that just blossoms and changes the world. So, and there are many mustard seeds blossoming in this audience. In the 90s, I spent a lot of work taking the federal budget and bringing it down to a local level. So how does the money work in my community? And when I finally realized what was possible when we re-engineered the money, I started walking around laughing, no matter how bad the corruption was. I was like, it's not a problem, because we don't have an economic problem. We have an amazingly abundant resources. You know, and so I thought I knew the big, fabulous secret until I met Joel and the Global BEM guys, and I got a load of what the technology could do, and I said, oh my word, you know, we're all gonna be billionaires. It's, you know, you have to forgive me, I still think like an investment banker. But, I thought, Joel, where's Joel? He's probably on. Was that not an amazing presentation? Okay. Yeah, and all of them today have been amazing. So, Joel, you know, everybody has a balance sheet. Your family has a balance sheet, an individual has a balance sheet. You have the assets on one side and the financing on the other. And, you know, the financing is my beat, but there are a lot of people here today talking about the asset side. And part of bringing real change is changing them together. You know, we've got to get both sides of the balance sheet waltzing together. I chose a picture of a human standing in a maze. One of my favorite performing artists is Curtis Mayfield, and he's got an album called New World Order. And in it, he has a song, and he says, sometimes it feels like there's one way in and no way out. You ever feel like that? Okay. Well, I work with individuals, with people, and one of the things that is happening to every person in America and every person globally, more or less, is we're being financially harvested. And the question when I work with people, and it's, you know, it's always slightly different because every person is unique and every situation is unique. That's one of the things that I've been blessed with understanding by working with individuals. But the question is, you're sitting here asking how? You know, I know what's going on doesn't make sense, but how do I navigate this environment and how do I make a difference? Because you know, I always say, where's Foster? Is Foster in the audience? Okay, so Foster, you know, one of the things Foster and I have talked a lot about is how do you enforce? Because when you design a system, the critical question is who enforces the rules? If we get together and write a constitution and agree on the rules, who's going to enforce? Do we create governments to enforce that then go out of control? Or do we enforce? And that's why literally I sometimes say, I did a prayer book for my Christmas card, and I said, all we have to do is get 8 billion people to practice the golden rule. That's the hard part. So I want to talk about, from an individual point of view, I'm coming down to you. How do you start to build your power to navigate this environment and change your life? You know, I have to go back to sort of grade B TV stories. Another great line I loved. Anybody here used to watch Dallas? I confess I did. There's a great scene when Bobbie's whining about some terrible thing JR does, and JR turns to me and says, boy, nobody gives you power, you take it. So what I'm interested in is seeing you build your power and doing it in a way that gives you energy, and then you can do whatever you do in your life. Each of you has your own purpose that will start to change things around and make it easier for all of us to practice the golden rule. The more of us who practice it, you know, the more it can spread virally. So let's just dive in. I'm going to talk about 3 things today. The first thing you need is a coherent mind. Okay, so we're going to talk about how a coherent mind, how you get it. The second thing you need is financial insight, because you are navigating in a world where the official reality and reality are very different. and they're getting more and more different. But one of the things I've done for a long time, and it's one of the things we try, it's reason I find myself very inexplicably in the media business, is if you look at how resources are allocated and what is happening with the money, with people's time and people's money, you can get a pretty reasonable picture of what is really going on. So I'm going to talk about financial insight and getting the power to see how the money works around you and in your life in a way that's going to start to free you up. And then the third thing I want to talk about, which I think is one of the most important things to real solutions, I'm going to talk about the importance of transparency and personal accountability when combined. Okay? And so let's just dive in. Here we go. Okay. Part of the problem that I have navigating my world, and I'm sure you share, is that we don't understand how our world works. If I asked you to come up to a blackboard or walk into a court of law and explain how the governance structure on planet Earth works, who here could write the organizational structure? Foster, don't raise your hand. Exactly. We live in a mystery. We live in a puzzle palace. It's, trying to figure out. My nickname for the committee that runs the planet is Mr. Global, and it's my placeholder for the mysterious governance structure. But I think one of the things we don't know is who is Mr. Global. The second thing I've come to believe, and I have to thank a whole lot of other people for helping me. First of all, the Coast to Coast audience was the one who really got me to understand and see. Who here listens to Coast? Or Art Bell, yeah. You guys have made an enormous difference to me because I kept whining. Why is nobody interested in communities or bridges or utilities or roads or whatever? Why do I have to care about space? And in fact, what I learned from the Coast to Coast audience and people like Richard Dillon and Dr. Joseph Farrell is, in fact, what I now believe is the organizing principle of our economy is the secrecy created and the money flowing into our response to whatever is going on in space and what we're doing there, okay? So space is unbelievably important to what's happening in your communities, okay? Because this is financed secretly, one family, one person, one community at a time. I always say, you can't back the drug dealers out of your neighborhood because they're led by Tony Soprano and he's financing James Bond. And if the cash flow stops, the black helicopters come down in your head. Okay? And it's a very centralized model. So one neighborhood can't get out because then it would spread virally and others would. So you want to see not only what's happening in space and how it relates to your communities, but you want to see what the secrecy for many, many decades now has done to build up an enormous national security state and have a whole world of people, including investors, achieve unprecedented privileges. We are choking on the privileges created by secrecy. And part of what we need to do is bring transparency to that. And it starts with making it a fashionable conversation to talk about what in the world is going on in space around it and where's all the money going. Okay. You also want to see what it's doing to our investments. If you look at the equity markets, I'm not going to talk a lot about this today, but if you look at the equity markets, you have on the two sides of the balance sheet of the global economy, again, you have assets, and then you have the financial side. And on the financial side, we're manipulating cost of capital in extraordinary ways. And one of the ways we're doing it is using the technology that we have in space through the satellites. I'm going to talk about today. But the other thing we're doing is we're transferring the line of what technology is allowed in and what's allowed out, just like Joel was talking about. If you look at the stock market, what you'll see is I mapped from 1996 to present. We have the NASDAQ, and then we have Lockheed Martin, the largest defense contractor in the country, and then we have the S&P. And what you'll see is what you're watching is technology transfer and that secret budget having a major impact on who's doing the best in the stock market. Okay? For the last 3 years, I've talked a lot about what's called the rebalancing of the global economy. Who here knows what I mean when I say the rebalancing of the global economy? Okay, so we've started a process. It started in the 90s, and it started exactly when we got the first global GPS navigation system up in the satellites. okay? Because remember, nobody puts money where you can't monitor and enforce. Okay, so you get global satellites, and suddenly you can start shifting money out of the developed world into the emerging markets. And the way we did it was a very shocking, very fast process. It's what a lot of us think of as globalization. So we went from a world where, say, in China, the per capita income was $3,000 a year, to the per capita income 3 years ago being $9,000. Today, it's probably about $12,000 to $13,000. Okay, our per capita income is $54,000, and where we're headed into a world. Remember, now you've got money sloshing around, essentially, looking for the best opportunities globally. We're going to a world where those per capita are going to be equivalent. And that's a big, shocking change for everybody. One of my favorite essay writers is a guy named Michael Ventura, and he had a wonderful essay about Los Angeles, and he said, we're standing in the psychic storm of our own being. Because we're talking about a world where 8 billion people are going to get online and communicate directly with each other. That's quite a psychic storm. And this is a poster. Our wonderful graphics designer, Ben Lazardi, where are you? I just got to point him out. He's back there. He does, every year we do a poster to sort of capture the theme of the year, and this year our theme was the space-based economy, so this is our poster, Space, Here You Go. But as I said, so much of what is happening in your life and my life is happening because of space, either because we need goo-gobs of money to do whatever we're doing, but the other thing is, if you now look at the planet, if you and I were to go up to the moon and look down at the planet, what we would see is over 21,000 pieces of stuff orbiting around the planet. It's getting thicker and thicker and thicker. Don't worry about the sun's rays. They won't be able to get through the satellites. Well, but don't laugh. We're coming into an enormous traffic jam in the orbital platform because everybody wants their own currency and payment systems in the digital space, right? So what are they all doing? The social media companies, they're putting up satellites as fast as they can. When did the tensions with Russia started? They started in 2011 when Russia became the second country in the world to have a global GPS navigation system. What's happening this year, the European global satellite system is going up, Galileo. So we're going to start to see a lot of incredible competition. And when you study, so now we have about, say, 1,300 to 1,600 satellites that are operational. When you study what they're up to, they're all about the control and concentration of resources on Earth, okay? So part of what we're dealing with is not just our response to space and whatever we're doing there and whatever those secrets are, but the other is the technology is now being built out, the infrastructure. People say we're not investing in infrastructure. Oh, yes, we are. We're investing a huge infrastructure, but it's flying over your head and you can't see it unless you go to the Australian outback and then you can see the International Space Station. Okay, coherence. Let me talk about coherence. Who here has heard Dr. William Tiller? Okay, Dr. William Tiller used to be the head of material sciences at Stanford, and he was able to raise enough private funding so that he could do scientific research into the issue of whether or not human intention can change material reality, including in great distances. It's fascinating stuff. And what he was able to do was document and prove that it does. Our intention, people always ask me, why are the oligarchs afraid of us? Because we literally have the power to change the world simply through our intention. You don't have to go out and have a fight with your local police. You can just meditate it. Okay, so I was doing an interview with him on the Solari Report, and I was, at the time, I was doing a lot of research on community prayer. I was very enthusiastic. And I said, oh, Dr. Tiller, I'm very interested in community prayer, and I'm dying to know what you think of it. And he said, well, you have to be very careful. He said, if the people doing the praying are coherent, it can help. If they're not coherent, it can make things worse. And it just rocked my world, and I realized, oh, I don't need to work harder. I need to start being more coherent. Okay, so let's talk about that. Edward Snowden talked about the one-way mirror. One of the fundamental problems in the economy is the government and the data beast that sits behind the government, the real power, can see everything we do. In fact, my guess is I could go into what I call the data beast, pull up all the data on one of you, and I would know more about you than you know about you, okay, because the analytics are so fantastic. The other problem is their finances are not transparent to us. And if there's anything we need to reverse, it's to have the power to have individual privacy, but particularly our mind. You know, I don't mind you knowing everything there is about my money. I want you to stay out of my mind. Okay. We are going through a process where the fundamental nature of the economy is changing dramatically, and it is because of communication technology. This is a chart that shows the growth of computers, then the smartphones, the pads, and this number is going straight up like a rocket. It is estimated by 2025 that everyone on the planet will have the equivalent of what is now a smartphone. Okay? And that's a very dramatic change. In 1995, when the global satellite system went up and we started to rebalance the global economy, there was less than 1% of the population on the internet. Today, it's probably about 3.5 billion today. Okay? Now, that's an astonishing change because it means the guys who are making $4,000 a year in India have an incredible incentive to arbitrage us out of our 54,000 or to create things together to do it. Okay, so you're talking about unleashing an incredible tsunami, and none of us understand, you know, sort of where it's going to lead, but it's going to be quite a psychic storm. Okay, so once everybody has a smartphone, what can happen? Digital currency, right? What's the ultimate control position on the planet? A fiat currency with no insurance, no deposit insurance that a sovereign government is responsible for, you know, that somebody can see. Okay? So as you can imagine, part of this issue of building out the space infrastructure is getting the satellite system in place to be in for this competition. This is one of the biggest gold rushes on the planet right now in a financial sense. Okay, I spend a lot of time looking at how we are influenced to do things against our best interest. And I'll tell you why I started to do this. I became, in 2007, an investment advisor, but I only wanted to work with individuals and families. And what I discovered was that people were consciously seeking, desiring things that were against their best interest, whether you looked at their time or their, you know, their incomes and expenses or their assets. And I started to unpack, okay, why is this happening? Why is it happening? And I finally went to a wonderful scientist I know and said, we've got to do a Solari report on entrainment technology and subliminal programming and how it's used for financial manipulation. You know, it's very interesting. I don't know how much you know about my background, but for many, 15 years, so many people have said, oh, it's going to collapse this year. And then I get asked, and I say, no, it's not. It's not going to collapse. It's going to slow burn. And the reality is one of the biggest differences between their point of view and my point of view is I've studied how invasive the controls and influence are with your mind. I don't know if you've ever been in a conference where they're using entrainment technology or in a venue when they're doing it, but it's very, very powerful. There's a great, just to give you some examples, there's a wonderful article, and I encourage you to read it. If you have one of those big digital TVs, you might want to junk it. Some guy went down to Target, got a big screen TV, came home, he was an attorney, so naturally he sat down and read all the terms and conditions. And then he wrote an article for Salon called, I'm terrified of my new TV, why I'm scared to turn this thing on, and you'd be too. Okay? Now, it's really funny. When you read the terms and conditions, it's amazing. Now, if we read all the terms and conditions we sign, we'd spend 3 months a year reading the terms and conditions. But, in fact, somebody did a study and came out with 3 months. Digital TVs, my guess, have a two-way capacity. So they're watching you, they're recording you, and if you read the terms and conditions, that's all legal. This is one of my favorite. We're having skyrocketing reports at emergency rooms of people walking into things, being hit by cars because they're literally entrained into their phone. At Christmas time, one guy walked off a cliff and died. He died. He walked off a cliff and died because he wasn't watching where he was going. That's entrainment. Okay, to reach a really absurd, I'm hoping that nobody here has seen The Kingsman because it's a dreadful movie. Who's seen the smart guy? Okay, but it shows you where this is going. Okay? And it shows you how, in my opinion, it's being used, although not as an extreme manner yet. In The Kingsman, you have Samuel Jackson playing a Silicon Valley billionaire, and he's put into place a network of satellite systems. Remember, Silicon Valley's doing that. They're trying to put into place global satellite systems, and these new microsatellites really help them do that. And what he's going to do, because he thinks the world is overpopulated, what he's going to do is turn on the entrainment, juice it up, and get everybody to kill each other. Right. Well, if you look at the divide and conquer that's happening, it's a metaphor for, in fact, what we're doing right now. Because the entrainment with the divide and conquer is getting everybody turned against each other, and it's working. But in The Kingsman, as a prototype, before they roll this out globally, they decide to turn it on in a small Southern Pentecostal church where everybody's there Sunday worshiping and giving praise and talking about love, and they turn it on. It goes through, not everybody has a smartphone, it goes through a select number of smartphones, and 200 people stand up and kill each other. It's probably the most gruesome thing you'll ever watch in a movie, but it's very instructive that somebody is trying to warn us. Which brings me to one of my favorite topics. Somebody this morning, I think it was Joel, said fear porn. I literally last year left the country because I couldn't stand the shriek-o-meter. So, and this is the picture I used to describe the shriek-o-meter. I was out in the Bay Area before the elections. So we're in 2000. It was 2014. The Republicans were trying to take the Senate, and it was close, but they just weren't getting over the top. And suddenly, 2 or 3 weeks before the election, they turned on the shriek-o-meter. Ebola, 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 Ebola. Ebola's in Africa. It's killing this. It's moving here. It's saying, it's in Dallas. It's killing, the center of the black budget. It's in Dallas, and it's going to kill everybody, and blah, blah, blah. And literally, the front page of all the newspapers, including the business press, was just Ebola, Ebola, Ebola. Meantime, I was getting a newsletter that I subscribed to from someone who's very good at helping small business clue in on what they need to know. And they're sending me flashes saying, you don't need to worry about Ebola. It won't be relevant this year or next year to your operations, so just ignore this. Okay, so we have the shriek-o-meter trying to scare us to death, and we have, the business press giving us the heads up, don't spend any time on this. And what happened the day of the election? Boom, suddenly Ebola's no problem. Okay, but it worked. The Republicans won the Senate. It worked. And if you look at the polls on numerous subjects, the shriek-o-meter works. And it works on people who I know better. But all of a sudden they're all worked up and they want to talk about ISIS. I said, why are you talking about ISIS? I truly believe if they turned off the entrainment, Donald Trump would disappear in, make a guess, 2 days to a month. So, and everybody would be walking around saying, what were we thinking? But now it's the ISIS shriek-o-meter. Okay, and when they turned on the shriek-o-meter, if you looked at the polls, the number one concern of the American people were jobs and economy. Okay, suddenly the shriek-o-meter turns on. ISIS is beheading people in the Middle East. Oh, ISIS is in Paris. Oh, ISIS is coming across the border. Oh, they're in your state. They could be coming to your door. And no, literally, that was the progression. And I can't tell you the people who should know better who were really calling me and asking, what should we do about ISIS? No, but your time is precious. You don't have time for the shriek-o-meter. So if you want real power, save yourself some time. Turn off your TV, turn off the shriek-o-meter, and just understand, we all use this media. I use this media. I sit in front of a big screen with a laptop. Just be discerning. Because the people who are using this media to influence you, they do not have your best interests at heart. You are dealing with the enemy, and you're letting the enemy into your intimate space and in your mind, and you have to be unbelievably careful. Okay? Another thing I wanted to bring up, if you haven't noticed yet, for the last 2 years, promoting women is the big thing. In fact, I have a commentary on my blog. I wrote a whole series about promoting women. And this always drives me crazy. The solution is men are too aggressive and hard, and what we need to do is put women in charge of everything. And then we'll sing Kumbaya, and we'll all get along, and everything will be all right. So it's the theory. But there's hard money behind this, and let me tell you what it is. The people who run the planet are great at rolling the local guys. And the way they often roll the local people is, divide and conquer. So I live in a very segregated community, and when I first got there, and I was going back and forth between black and white, I used to say to them, look, if you would just collaborate about how the money works, you could hate each other rich instead of hating each other poor. I'm not telling you not to hate each other. I'm just saying don't get played. But the divide and conquer, and the number one divide and conquer we have to heal if we're going to succeed. Men and women have to give each other energy. We have to be for each other, and we cannot let Mr. Global use one of us to roll the other, okay? The economics behind this are as follows. One of the things that has driven a lot of crazy things and fear in the United States is the fact that we are now no longer the top dog. Asia's bigger, China's bigger, China plus India is going to be really bigger. You're talking about 2.4 billion. We only have about 325 million. But when everyone has a smartphone and you have the most satellites, what can you do? You can tender for the hearts and minds of each and every person on the planet. And of course, that's what we're up to. The second bar with the red around it is global female income. The United States, or the developed world, plus women everywhere, trumps every other market, okay? And so this is the idea of putting women sort of titularly in charge of everything, because you're turning to the world, including the Muslim world, and saying, oh, you're not being treated well there, just come over to our side, and we'll be good. So you're going to watch a lot more of this women thing. It's going to be deeply offensive to those of us who want to heal the divide and conquer. Okay, second power. Financial insight really helps. I have an expression you'll often hear about understanding how the money works. But all my life, it's been my business to sort of unpack how the financial performance is occurring, whether it's in a company, a government. And it's remarkable. If you just track the mathematics of time and money, it's amazing what you can see. So when a politician says yakety, yakety, yak, I'm never listening to that. I'm trying to go downstairs and say, okay, what is the result going to be? Who's going to get the money? Because if you work in Washington, which I did once upon a time, you have the federal budget, and then you have this yakety, yakety, yak. Like in the campaign, they go yakety, yakety, yak. And if you look at how the money gets whacked up versus the yakety, yakety, yak, it's totally disassociated. This is reality. This is official reality. So a lot of us spend hundreds of hours a year watching the official reality, watch the money, okay, because you can start to see incredible things. So I just want to play this and then talk about the extent to which the money in reality is very different than the official reality. So Aaron, could you run the video? Here we go. 8 minutes. In 1 year. In 1 year.
That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
First question. My second question, Mr. Secretary, according to the Attorney General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon, to which Mr. Cooper alluded. Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the number one reason government can't balance its checkbook. The Pentagon has claimed year after year that the reason it can't account for the money is because its computers don't communicate with each other. My second question, Mr. Secretary, is who has the contracts today to make those systems communicate with each other? How long have they had those contracts? And how much have the taxpayers paid for them? Finally, Mr. Secretary, after the last hearing, I thought that my office was promised a written response to my question regarding the 4 war games on September 11th. I have not yet received that response, but would like for you to respond to the questions that I've put to you today, and then I do expect the written response to my previous question, hopefully by the end of the week. Question, please.
The second question, I've forgotten what the second question was.
I think Ms. Jonas knows it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. I appreciate the question. I appreciate your interest in our department's financial condition, and we are working very hard on that program. I've just come back recently.
I understand that you're working hard on it, but my question was, who has the contract? How long have they had that contract? And how much money have we spent on it?
In general, we spend about $20 billion in the Department on Information Technology Systems. The accounting systems are part of that. I can get you the exact number for the record of what we spend on our current, what we call legacy systems, and those that we're moving toward.
And who has the contracts?
That would be a multitude of individuals.
Could you name some, please?
Well, I think off the top of my head, well, I would rather not. I'd rather provide that for the record.
That's
The
not
controller is saying
privileged
she doesn't know
information,
who
is it?
controls her accounting system.
Well, please. And we still have time, so please.
I would be glad to provide for the record. I don't want to talk from the top of my head.
Scope is hard to imagine. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa joining us now to help us figure out what this all means. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us for Happy Hour. I saw you quote it, you're using the analogy to the birth of Christ, that we wouldn't have spent as much money since his birth, that this big old bailout. Very interesting to come up with that.
Well, it's even worse than that. It's if we spent $1 million a day every day since the birth of Christ, we wouldn't get to $1 trillion. And we're likely to lose far more than that. You know, having $23.7 trillion at risk basically is about 1.5 times all the money that every man, woman, and child in America produces. The entire gross domestic product's only about 17 trillion. So this is an amazing amount of money at risk, and it's okay to have it at risk in order to get America moving again. What's not okay is what we're going to hear from the special IG tomorrow, which is he's being locked out of any kind of oversight, reporting, transparency, all the things we were promised. He's
missing, Ed, is this. We had a national tragedy, an economic disaster that took place barely a year ago. In the last 18 months of the Bush administration, America lost $12 trillion on its net worth. That's $40,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country, and I cannot think of a single person who's held responsible for that. Nobody in government, nobody on Wall Street, nobody nowhere. That's the fundamental problem right now. And if people on Wall Street are going to continue to get great bonuses in good times and in bad times, we can kiss this economy goodbye. It's not going to work. In capitalism, winners have to win and losers have to lose, and nobody's been held responsible for that enormous erosion. 20% of our accumulated wealth over the course of 2 centuries gone in 18 months. Nobody's been punished for that. That's the problem.
Altogether, $26 trillion of bailouts just in those 2 categories, not including TARP, not including FDIC financing of U.S. institutions. $26 trillion, that's almost $100,000 for every man, woman, and child in America, all done by the Federal Reserve without any act of Congress authorizing it.
All right, there's a lot of numbers thrown around here, and sometimes when you just hear it abstractly, 13 billion sounds like it's larger than 7 trillion. Which of all of these numbers, which outrages you the most and which should outrage the public the most?
I think that we can all agree the trillions of dollars that were extended by the Federal Reserve to the banks in the form of corporate welfare. What they did is they took our money, the U.S. dollar, the fact that they control the currency, the fact that they have control of the money supply, and for the first time in history, and I'm talking about in the 100-year history of the Federal Reserve, they played favorites. They said, we'll give 100 trillion to this institution, 100 billion to this institution, another 100 billion to this institution, and so on down the line, when you and I couldn't even come close to accessing that kind of money on those terms. They lent out this money at 0.01% interest. 0.01% interest. Go try to get a loan like that from your bank.
Bloomberg's report that there are trillions of dollars in off-balance sheets transactions that the Federal Reserve has entered into since last September. Are you familiar with those off-balance sheet transactions?
You know, I think it may be important at this point, too, just to bring up a certain aspect related to our jurisdiction. And just to clarify, perhaps, some of my earlier comments. We are the Inspector General for the Board of Governors, and we have direct oversight over board programs and operations, and are also able to look at board-delegated functions to the reserve banks, as well as the board's oversight and supervision of the reserve banks. We do not have jurisdiction to directly go out and audit reserve bank activities.
So let me tell you what she just said. She said if a group of people got together, rounded up all the capital in the country, and moved it out secretly, it's not within our scope of work. Okay. So from the beginning of the rebalancing the global economy till now, it's estimated 8.5 trillion has disappeared from the federal governments. The bailouts were 27 trillion plus. There's also been other pump and dump financial fraud. And if you look at the combination, what I believe is we've had a financial coup d'etat. I've written a lot about this on the Solari website, and in the Solari report, I'm not going to go into detail. There are lots of estimates of where it's back of the envelope, and it's how I come up with it. But the reality, think of it this way. It's as if the G7 nations got together and said, you know, we can either pay for nursing homes, or we can shift all the money out, control it going forward, and then have enough money to go into space in a very big way. Okay, that was the decision. Now, I bring this up because one of the most important things that's going to happen in 2000, well, let me back up. One of the most important symptoms of this happened in 2015. No one wanted to be Speaker of the House. Right? It's like a hot potato. Nobody wanted it. And the reason nobody wanted it is, where do appropriation bills originate? Who's responsible to balance the budget? It's Congress. Who runs Congress? It's the Speaker of the House. Who's in the hot seat? Okay? Nobody wanted it. I'm terrified to know what they gave Paul Ryan to get him to do it, because he's like, no, I don't want this. You know, I don't want to have to tell 325 million Americans what I'm about to do. But after the presidential election, we're going to have to re-engineer the federal budget. And I want you to understand that the federal budget has been operating outside not only the Constitution, but the laws of financial management for a long time. And you have every right and power to come to the table and say, you know something? You may not have any money, but I will take an equity participation in those 40 spaceships, and I want a locker in the underground bunker in my state, because I paid for it. So the assets went someplace, and under the law, whether you get them back with common law right of offset, whether you get them back with all sorts of tax escrows, there's hundreds of ways to get that money or the assets back moved into the common pot. But it requires transparency, and it requires knowing that it's there. Okay. We have a great cartoonist, and we love to make cartoons about what's going on. This is a businessman talking to another businessman, and he's saying, black ops, black schmops, why should I sweat and care what a bunch of UFO-chasing weirdos are doing 100 feet below the desert in Nevada? And a hand is reaching in the wall, pulling out his wallet, and it's saying, cha-ching. This is why every one of us cares. You are financing this, okay? And it all works back to your communities and your wallet. There's a big black hole. I always say, look, here's the debt, here's the equity, here's the assets. There's this big question mark. Go talk to Richard Dillon. He knows what's happening there. But literally, we have a huge hole on the balance sheet, and one of the most important questions we're all going to have to ask is this economy open or closed? Let me say it again. Is this economy open or closed? Are we optimizing just on planet Earth? Or are we optimizing someplace else? And if you listen to the financial commentators, most financial commentators assume it's a closed economy, but they couldn't prove it in a court of law. They couldn't tell you how the governance structure on planet works. They couldn't tell you where the money in the black budget's been disappearing to all this year. They couldn't tell you. So they're making an assumption it's closed, which is just as much an assumption as the assumption that it's open. And the reason we have to ask the question, among other things, is it's behaving a lot more like an open economy. Everybody keeps thinking it's going to collapse. And every time I try and call one of those guys and say, can we talk about the black budget? He's like, no, I won't go there. Okay? It's part of this disassociation between a reality and official reality, and part of the thing that's going to help you bring it back to ground is insight into the money in your lives and the money working around you, particularly making it, the more difficult you are to harvest, the harder their lives are. So please let them, I'm not going to talk about it today. We can talk about it at the workshop. Anything you can do to stop them from stealing your money cuts off their gravy train. Okay, and that includes sort of what's going on in the stock market, which we can talk about tomorrow. Okay, in the 90s, I was making a software tool called Community Wizard. Now, let me ask you a question. One of the most important if you bought a stock, every year you get an annual report, right? Just like Solari does an annual report. You buy a stock, you get an annual report. Okay, one of the biggest investments you make is in government. And under the Constitution, you're required to hold your elected representatives responsible, right? Do you get a financial statement for your congressional district? Why not? In 1996, an old partner of mine from Wall Street came down to my company, which was then in Washington, and I was explaining to him this opportunity to re-engineer the federal budget one neighborhood at a time. Forget doing it in Washington. Do it bottom-up, participatory budgeting, one neighborhood at a time. He looked at me and said, this is really stupid. This will never work. And I said, well, where do you live? He said, I live in Bronxville. So I pulled up the Community Wizard on Bronxville, and we pulled it up, and we started to go down. And the first item was $4 million for flood insurance. The guy went crazy. He was Cuban. He started screaming in Spanish. I said, what's the matter? He said, Bronxville's on a hill. I've lived there for 30 years. We never have floods. It's impossible. And there's a lot of corruption in the insurance programs. So I gave him a printout of everything we had that showed him maps of how the money worked in his community. If you look up here, this is maps of defaulted mortgages by community. And I showed him where all the money was in Bronxville. And the next day we had a conference call at 10 o'clock. I called. He was busy. He's always on time. I finally got through in the afternoon, and I said, Luis, where were you? We had a conference call at 10 o'clock. And he said, I have been on the phone with a deputy mayor of Bronxville for 4 hours, and we have gone through all these numbers, line item by line item. All this waste and corruption is going to stop. And I said, Luis, I thought you said it was hopeless. He said, that's before I had the numbers for my neighborhood. Okay? So I'm going to tell you, the housing bubble could never have happened if you had a financial statement for your congressional district. So one of the things I want you to, the campaign is always an opportunity to talk to your local, state, federal officials. I want you to go to the table every time saying, why can't I get the financial statements for my congressional district on my app, on my smartphone, right? GIS software, it's not hard. Richard talked this morning about false flags. One of the things you notice is false flags and disasters are much more likely to happen in areas where you have enormous amounts of mortgage fraud, and the feds need to clean it up. So I always say, if you're living near mortgage fraud or a database about a mortgage fraud, you might want to think about changing jobs. Buildings with lots of databases on fraud tend to blow up. Okay. One of the most important books I ever read to help me understand real solutions was a wonderful book. It's short, it's easy to read, by Robert Axelrod, wonderful economist at the University of Michigan. It's called The Evolution of Cooperation. And Axelrod said, how could we create the conditions precedent to have a peaceful society? What could we do in how we run the system so that everybody just acting in their own self-interest will produce peace? Because in theory, peace should make more money than war. I mean, war makes money for a few guys, but you destroy the whole. So he did a bunch of studies, and one of the things he found was if I can go halfway across the world, do something dirty, and come back and be socially respectable because I'm wealthy and successful, then crime pays. But what he also found is if you bring transparency to which individuals are doing what, in fact, the human race will shun individuals doing dirty stuff because they know they're better off not playing with dirty characters. They make more money in the long run playing with the clean characters. So interestingly enough, transparency that translates into personal accountability makes an enormous difference. Well, when we read that, we started making all sorts of cartoons. First, I did it with a firm in London, and now we make cartoons literally turning people doing the dirty stuff into the laughing stock. Okay? But, you know, you have no idea what it does to people like me when we go out in the world and the people we've seen do the most horrible racketeering, you know, financing and perpetuating genocide in low-income communities all over the world, US, here, everywhere, being held up as not only socially fashionable, but everybody loves them, you know, and you would be amazed. So you really want to think, and people will say, well, there's nothing I can do. Yes, if you sit down at a round table and you're sitting next to a partner at Goldman Sachs, you can say, you know something, I want nothing to do with you, and get up and move. Shunning is one of the most powerful tools in the planet. If you will just hold people in your lives personally accountable, it would make a huge difference. Okay. So we want to bring transparency. What are the questions we want to bring transparency to? Who is Mr. Global? This is our planet. We have a right to know how the governance structure works. And we shouldn't back down until we get that. Okay? What are we doing in space and why? As I said, the thing destroying our civilization and our economy is the secrecy and the privileges it creates around the black budget. That's part of what you saw with all the missing money in Alan Greyspan. But we can't understand the point of view of the people leading things unless we know what the problems they're grappling with. So we need transparency. And I have to tell you, the one thing you can do, and I'm just going to plug his book, you know, ridiculously. Richard Dillon has a book called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. It is the single best treatment of this whole issue. You can give it to your money manager. You can give it to your investment advisor. You can give it, you know, this is a book that is highly, you know, respectable and anyone can read. If you will just read it and then give it, and let's turn this into a fashionable conversation, okay? Because then it can go. What are the opportunities to re-engineer the money in your community? They're enormous, okay? So one of the things I always scream about, if you come to Tennessee where I live, 25% of the population is on food stamps. If you pick up the line and call technical support for a problem with your food stamps, you get somebody working for JP Morgan Chase who's living in India, doing a job that that person could do, and if they were doing that job, they wouldn't need food stamps. So the American taxpayer is paying twice for something with a big markup to JP Morgan that you don't have to do. And if you go through the federal budget as it relates to your community, there are thousands and thousands of those opportunities if we're willing to collaborate, which is why, who here is going to go to a debate or event or town hall meeting with their congressman during the 2016 elections? Please demand financial statements for your congressional district. How in the world under the Constitution can you hold them accountable if you don't see how the money works? Okay? Because how the money works is very, very different than the yakety, 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 yak. Okay? Because when they get into the machinery, they're going to have to do what the machinery needs because that's how the money works. Okay? I'll tell the red button story at the workshop, but the reality is the hypocrisy is not just in the leadership. The hypocrisy is in the general population as well. But it's because we've literally for 70 years not been able to look into the mirror of our financial lives, okay? If we could, that $100,000 that Congressman Grayson was talking about, that could be in your pockets, okay? Because you would come to the table with some negotiating power, okay? Okay, so what do you do next? It's always, you're gonna leave here, you're gonna go out in the world. Remember, I started off with a person in a maze? There's always a way out, but the key to the way out is you are each special and unique. You have a different experience, you have a different history, you have different needs than everybody else in this audience and everybody else on the planet. So here's what's important. You need to decide what your fabulous life, I call it the free and inspired life. Because the contribution you can make is simply using transparency, using a coherent mind, protecting yourself from the media, using financial insight to get your free and inspired life. Okay? The more people who can remove themselves from the harvesting, the stronger the immune system financially and culturally in the whole planet. Okay? And people always say, well, I'm only one person, what can I do? One of the guys who keeps running for governor in my state, he says, a snowflake is really small and not very powerful, but you realize you get enough of them together, you can shut down New York City. Okay? So all I'm asking you to do is build your immunity system, and whatever you do the purpose that, make the contribution to all of these different things that really inspires you, because that's where you'll be productive. That's where you'll be efficient. And don't you let anybody make you feel bad about you living your free, inspired life, because that is Mr. Global's, number 1 to number 3 tactic. Make you feel like you ought to be over here trudging along on the treadmill, generating the harvest for him and his pals. Okay. So practical implications. Practicing personal coherence, again, everybody's different, but you need to be very discerning about the media and the power of the entrainment technology and subliminal programming. I just did a wonderful Solari report with John Rappaport and on the beatdown at U.S. universities, and we published a wonderful interview of a professor at UC Davis talking about all the bizarre behavior by students and the different, sort of politically sensitive stuff that's being promoted, and how they were all literally entrained on their phones. Okay, this is very serious. The second thing, grow your financial insight, okay? Whether it's insight to protect your own assets or insight to understand the money going around you. Remember, the great thing about an election year is we all get in rooms and talk about what's going on. And instead of responding to the yakety-yakety-yak or the shriek-o-meter, get to the kitchen table and start looking at where's the money? How does the money work? Because the shriek-o-meter always turns on when they don't want you to see how the money works. When did the San Bernardino shooting happen? Okay, the story came out that ISIS is financing their operation selling oil through Turkey to Israel. Boom, suddenly nobody's paying attention because we have the shooting in San Bernardino. Okay, so network to answer the unanswered questions and make it socially acceptable and fashionable to do it. Don't let people get away with saying, oh, well, we won't go there. No, we have to go there. It's the adult thing. The number one problem this country has financially is that everyone globally believes that we are not under adult supervision. Okay? So each one of us needs to exercise adult supervision and not be afraid. Okay? We just did at Solari, I had very dreadful experiences when I was in the Bush administration with the corporate media. And I sort of backed into having a media business. It's very funny. But one of the things I learned in the process of doing that is you guys are really busy. You do not have thousands of hours a year to digest huge amounts of complicated information. So what we try and do is publish a quarterly report. We do an annual. We just came out with the annual for 2015, and then one each quarter. And it is designed with big themes and trends and stories and a sweep up of the financial markets. If you want to know what's happening in the global economy and how it impacts you, but you have no time, you can read those 4 wrap-ups, and you'll be one of the most literate people on the planet about what's going on. That's the goal. Okay, those are a picture. And as I said, this year, our big thing is space-based economy. Okay, so here you are. We're going to go out. We're going to use coherence. We're going to use financial insight. We're going to use networking and bringing transparency to the most important unanswered questions. And you all are going to have a free and inspired life. Thank you.